I used to look forward to our company's holiday party every year. It was always a big deal, glamorous, with too much food, expensive cocktails, and music that blared a little too loudly. People who normally sat at their desks, glued to their computers, would suddenly transform into someone else after a few drinks. The introverts became the life of the party, and the most serious managers were cracking jokes and telling embarrassing stories. It was the one night when you could drop the corporate mask and just enjoy being with your coworkers. That all changed last year. It was supposed to be a normal office party, but looking back now, I feel like I should have noticed the signs. I should have known something was wrong the moment the invitation was sent out. It was a little different than the usual email, with a strange subject line, "The last toast, a holiday gathering to remember." The word "last" stuck with me, but I didn't think much of it at the time. It was probably just an odd marketing tactic, or someone trying to sound more festive than usual. The venue was a swanky hotel downtown, the kind with marble floors, high ceilings, and that slightly too perfect Christmas tree in the corner. The party was set to run late, well past midnight. We arrived around 8 p.m. and everything seemed normal. Everyone was mingling, grabbing drinks and laughing. The lights were dim, and the atmosphere was festive, if not a little too controlled. I remember feeling a weird tension in the air, but I chalked it up to the fact that my colleagues and I had been working hard for months, and we were all just eager to unwind. It was around 10:30 when things started to feel off. The music, which had been upbeat and loud, suddenly shifted to a strange, eerie tune that didn't quite fit the holiday vibe. It was like someone had switched the playlist without warning. People glanced at each other confused, but no one said anything. The song wasn't something I'd ever heard before. It sounded almost ancient, like a dirge, the kind of music you'd expect to hear at a funeral. I went to the bar to grab another drink, hoping it would loosen up the weird tension in the room. As I stood there, waiting for my turn, I caught sight of something that made my skin crawl. There, in the corner of the room near the window, stood a figure. A man, dressed in a suit that didn't match the festive atmosphere at all. He was completely still, staring directly at the crowd, with a faint smile that seemed too wide for comfort. I couldn't see his eyes clearly. There was something about his face that made me want to look away, but I couldn't. He wasn't part of the party. I knew everyone here, and no one knew him. I didn't say anything, though. I didn't want to seem paranoid. Maybe he was just a latecomer who got caught up in the wrong party, right? But the longer I stared, the more my stomach turned. As the night wore on, I noticed more odd things. People started acting strangely. Some were talking to people who weren't there, while others seemed to have forgotten their own names. The drinks weren't hitting me like they usually did. In fact, I felt a strange clarity that made everything around me feel distant, like I was watching the whole event from behind a thick glass. It was as if I was in a dream, a very bad one. It was about midnight when things really started to spiral. The lights flickered once, twice, before going completely out. The room plunged into darkness, and for a moment there was silence except for that haunting music, which somehow kept playing. Then the whispers started. Soft at first, but getting louder, like people were muttering secrets to each other. But when I turned to look around, no one was speaking. The whispers were coming from nowhere, from the very walls themselves, it seemed. I was starting to feel dizzy, like the room was spinning. My heart was racing, and I was about to step outside to get some fresh air when I heard a voice behind me. A cold, slow voice that sent chills down my spine. "Do you see it too?" I turned around, my body stiff with fear, and there was the man from the corner of the room. He was standing right behind me now, his face inches from mine. His smile was wider than before, if that was even possible. I could see his teeth sharp, almost unnaturally so, and his eyes. His eyes were pitch black. Not just the pupils, but the whole eye. No white at all, just empty black voids. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My whole body froze. He leaned in closer, whispering something in my ear. I didn't catch all of it, but the words that echoed in my mind were "You'll be next" before I could react. The lights flickered back on, and the man was gone, like he had never been there. The party was still going, the music still playing, and everyone was back to their normal selves, as if nothing had happened. I couldn't leave fast enough. I grabbed my things and rushed out of there, my heart pounding in my chest. I haven't been able to shake the feeling of that night. I'm not sure what happened or who that man was, but ever since I've felt like I'm being watched. I tried to ask around about the guy, but no one else saw him. And when I looked up the venue after the party, I found something strange. It was reported to be closed for renovations. It didn't make sense. Why was it open for a party then? I still haven't been able to get answers. What I do know is this: that holiday party wasn't like any other I'd been to. I don't know if it was something paranormal or just a figment of my overactive imagination, but the image of that man, his teeth, his eyes, it haunts me. Every Christmas since, I keep my distance from office parties. There's no telling what might be lurking in the shadows, waiting to make its presence known. There was some. Looking back, I wish I had known better than to attend that office party. It wasn't just any party, it was the office party. The one everyone talked about, the one that was supposed to be a celebration of the year's hard work. We were all told it would be at this upscale new venue downtown, something sleek and modern, a place we'd never been to before. It was supposed to be fun. It was supposed to be a time to relax and bond with coworkers outside of the cubicles and conference rooms. At least that's what I thought it would be. I'd been working late that night, trying to meet a deadline that no one seemed to care about but me, so I was already a bit on edge when I showed up. It was around 9:30 when I arrived, and things already felt. The first hint was the atmosphere as soon as I stepped into the venue. It wasn't the festive, welcoming vibe I'd expected from a holiday party. Instead, it felt like something was hanging in the air, thick, heavy, and wrong. The place looked like it had been hastily decorated, with tinsel thrown across tables and a few half-hearted Christmas lights strung up in the corners. The music was barely audible, a soft jazz tune that didn't match the energy I'd hoped for. I scanned the room for familiar faces, but everyone seemed a little distant. My coworkers were scattered around, chatting in small groups, their voices low and a little too careful, as if they were all trying to make the best of an uncomfortable situation. There was no warmth, no spark of holiday cheer. I went up to the bar, hoping to loosen up with a drink. The bartender, a tall woman with dark hair and piercing eyes, handed me a cocktail without much of a smile. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now I realized she never spoke a word. Not a hello, not a thank you, just a silent gesture as she slid the drink across the counter. I should have walked away then. Instead, I took my drink and wandered further into the party, trying to shake off the unease that seemed to be creeping up on me. I caught up with some colleagues I didn't know too well, but we tried to keep the conversation light, just talking about work and the usual small talk. No one seemed to want to talk about anything personal, as if they were all trapped in this strange, muted bubble. Then, at around 10:30, the first thing that really unsettled me happened. The lights flickered, then went out completely. The entire room was plunged into darkness. The air felt colder in an instant, and I could feel goosebumps on my arms. There was a moment of panic where everyone just stopped talking, unsure of what to do. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. I don't know how long it was, but I could hear my own heartbeat in the quiet. Then, without warning, the lights snapped back on. But everything had changed. The music, which had been soft and unremarkable before, now blared through the speakers, loud and almost deafening. It wasn't the same song either. It was something darker, more chaotic, like the soundtrack of a nightmare. The mood in the room shifted in an instant. People who had been standing around talking were now huddled together, looking over their shoulders as though they were expecting something or someone to appear. That's when I saw him. Standing by the grand entrance to the venue was a man I had never seen before. He was dressed in a tuxedo, perfectly pressed, with a stark white shirt that seemed almost too bright in the dim light. He was staring directly at me, his eyes fixed on mine as if he knew exactly who I was. But the strangest thing was, he wasn't smiling. In fact, he wasn't doing anything. He was just standing there, completely still, staring. At first I thought maybe he was a late arrival to the party, someone from a different company. But there was something in his eyes that made me feel uneasy, something I couldn't place. It was as if he wasn't just looking at me, he was looking through me. I turned away quickly, trying to ignore the discomfort bubbling up inside me, but I couldn't. I kept stealing glances back at him. Every time I did, his gaze was still locked on mine, unwavering, unblinking. It wasn't long before I noticed that other people were starting to notice him too. They weren't talking about it, but their eyes kept drifting in his direction, their expressions showing the same unease I was feeling. Then, as if on cue, the man slowly started to walk toward the center of the room. People stepped aside for him without question, like they were compelled to do so. And that's when the whispers started. They were soft at first, barely audible, like voices coming from nowhere. But they grew louder until it felt like the entire room was filled with hushed voices, all murmuring the same words over and over again. I couldn't make out the words at first, but then it became clear. Toast, the voices whispered. One last toast, I don't know why, but the repetition of those words sent a chill down my spine. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run as far away from that room as possible, but I couldn't. My body felt frozen, like I was trapped in place, unable to move. It was as if some unseen force was keeping me there, bound to this terrible, inexplicable moment. The man finally reached the center of the room and raised a glass, his silent toast to the room. The eerie music kept playing in the background, and the whispers grew louder and louder, until I felt like my mind was going to snap. And then, as soon as he had lifted the glass, the lights flickered again, this time longer. When they came back on, the man was gone, completely vanished, like he had never been there at all. The room was silent. No one spoke, no one moved. It was as if everyone was waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, people slowly started to talk again. The whispers stopped, the music returned to its original volume, and the party resumed as if nothing strange had happened. But I could still feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. I left the party early that night. I didn't even say goodbye to you. I just couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something that I couldn't explain. The man, the whispers, the cold that seemed to hang in the air, nothing about that night felt right. I've never gone to another office party since then. Every time the holidays roll around, I remember that strange night, the strange man, and the toast that no one ever understood. I'm not sure what happened at that party. Maybe it was all in my head, or maybe it wasn't. But one thing I know for sure, there are some things that shouldn't be seen, and some parties that are best left forgotten. I'll admit, I wasn't exactly thrilled about the office holiday party that year, but like everyone else, I felt obligated to go, especially since it was being held at this new upscale venue that was being hyped up for months. Everyone at work seemed excited. People were talking about the open bar, the catered food, the fancy atmosphere. But to be honest, I was mostly just looking forward to the free drinks and the chance to escape my desk for a few hours. I didn't really care about mingling with people I only saw at work. But that night, it didn't go the way I thought it would. I got to the venue around 8, just as the party was starting to get into full swing. The first thing I noticed when I walked in was how empty it felt. There were plenty of people there, but the space felt off, like it was too big for the crowd. The lighting was dim, and the music was too quiet. There was no buzz, no excitement. It was almost like people were waiting for something to happen, but no one knew exactly what. At first, I just grabbed a drink and found a corner to stand in, trying to blend in and avoid getting sucked into too many conversations. But then, things started getting weird. Around 9, I noticed someone who didn't seem to belong. He was standing by the door, just kind of lingering, not really interacting with anyone. The weird thing was, I knew I didn't recognize him. This was an office party, and I could spot the familiar faces from a mile away. But this guy? No clue. He was tall, with dark hair, and a sharp suit that looked like it cost more than my monthly rent. His face was pale, almost sickly looking, and his eyes seemed way too intense. It was as if he was scanning everyone in the room, sizing them up. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was out of place, but I just assumed he was a +1, or maybe a friend of the boss. As the night wore on, I tried to ignore him. But there was something about him that kept pulling my attention. It wasn't even like he was doing anything out of the ordinary. He was just standing there by himself, occasionally sipping on a drink. Then, around 10, the power went out. It wasn't a full blackout, but the lights flickered, dimmed, and then went completely out for a few seconds. I heard people start murmuring, a bit of nervous laughter as they checked their phones for any signs of a bigger issue. But then, just as suddenly as it happened, the lights came back on and everything seemed fine, almost too fine. It was like nothing had happened, but there was this weird sense of unease in the air. But that's when the guy by the door made his move. He didn't walk, didn't even seem to move in a normal way. It was like he appeared at the center of the room in an instant. One moment, he was by the door. The next moment, he was standing in front of the bar, his eyes locked on the crowd. He wasn't speaking to anyone, but it felt like everyone suddenly noticed him. The chatter stopped, and the music slowed down, almost like it was being manipulated. It wasn't just me who was noticing him now. People were looking around, confused, whispering to each other. I could hear someone behind me saying something about how this guy wasn't supposed to be there, but no one seemed to have the courage to confront him. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, maybe a weird coincidence or just the drink playing tricks on me, but that wasn't the case. About 10 minutes after the lights flickered, the power went out again, this time longer, and when the lights came back on, that guy, that stranger, was right next to me. I wasn't even sure how he'd gotten there. I had been standing in the corner, minding my own business, and the next thing I knew, he was standing right beside me, close enough for me to feel a chill radiating off of him. His eyes locked onto mine like he had been waiting for something, like he was waiting for me. I turned away quickly, trying to act like it wasn't a big deal, but my heart started pounding in my chest, and I felt this intense, suffocating anxiety building up inside of me. I glanced around for someone, anyone, to help break the tension, but people were just staring at him. No one was saying anything. The man just stood there, silent as ever, until he finally spoke. His voice was soft but unnervingly clear. "You're not supposed to be here" wasn't a question. It wasn't even a statement of confusion. It was a fact. His voice was calm, almost detached, as if he knew something I didn't. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to run away, but my body was frozen in place. My eyes darted around the room again, looking for someone to back me up, but no one was moving. No one was even breathing. Then, just as quickly as he'd appeared, he started walking toward the exit, but it wasn't like a normal walk. He didn't seem to be walking. It was more like he was floating. His feet barely touched the floor, and yet he was moving fast, like he was being pulled away by some invisible force. That's when I finally snapped out of my daze. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to leave. I rushed to the door, just barely catching a glimpse of the man slipping outside. I followed, not sure what I was hoping to see, but when I reached the sidewalk, there was no sign of him. No shadow, no trace that he'd ever been there. It wasn't until I checked my phone later that I realized just how wrong everything had been. My phone had been dead for a while, but when I turned it back on, I saw a message from a colleague. It was time-stamped about 15 minutes after I had left the party, and it simply read, "Did you see that guy in suit? No one knows who he is. He's been wandering around the building all night." He left before we could ask him anything. That's when it hit me the guy wasn't just someone who had wandered in from outside. He had been there, in the building, before any of us had even arrived, and he wasn't just any stranger. He had an agenda. No one at the party knew who he was, but that didn't matter. The real question was, why was he there? And why did he know so much about us? I don't know what happened that night. Was it just a weird coincidence? A guy who happened to crash the party? Or was there something darker at play? I've never been able to shake the feeling that something was off about him. Something that wasn't quite human. To this day, I have no answers, only a question that haunts me every holiday season. Who was the uninvited guest? I've always been one of those people who doesn't really enjoy office parties. Don't get me wrong, I'm not a Grinch. But I'm not the type who thrives on small talk and awkward mingling with coworkers I barely know. However, one particular holiday office party stands out in my mind, and not for any of the usual reasons. What started as a typical gathering turned into something far more unsettling. It was the last office party of the year. The kind everyone felt obligated to attend, even though we all knew it would be a few hours of forced cheer. The usual suspects were there. Some people were already drunk. Others were just getting started. The music was a little too loud, the drinks a little too strong, and the Christmas tree in the corner was flickering with too many lights. Nothing out of the ordinary. Or so I thought. I was at the bar when I noticed her. At first I thought she was just another coworker I hadn't met yet. She had dark hair, a red dress, and this smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She stood by herself in the corner, quietly observing everyone. I found it odd because no one seemed to be approaching her or even acknowledging her presence. Usually someone would have struck up a conversation by now, right? But no one did. I shrugged it off at first. It's a big office and sometimes new people just slip through the cracks, so I continued to mingle, making the rounds like you're supposed to with these things. But every now and then I'd glance over at her. It wasn't like she was doing anything strange, just standing there watching. But the more I looked, the more uneasy I felt. Eventually I found myself standing near the buffet table, pretending to enjoy some of the dry chicken bites when I heard her voice. It wasn't loud or attention-grabbing, but it was clear. "The party's almost over," she said, her eyes locked on mine. I froze for a moment, caught off guard. I didn't recognize her. Who was she talking to? Me? No one else seemed to be paying attention. She didn't wait for me to respond, she just nodded as if she knew something I didn't. I felt a chill run down my spine. I tried to shake it off as a weird interaction and turned back to my drink, but I couldn't help it. Something about the whole situation felt off. I felt like I was being watched. Around 11 p.m., everyone started gathering in the center of the room for a toast. The boss, as usual, was making a speech. Everyone was ready to wrap up the night and head home, but there was an odd tension in the air. It was like the excitement had drained out of the room. No one seemed particularly enthusiastic about the toast, but everyone still raised their glasses. Except her. She stood there, staring at the group, her glass held loosely in one hand, but she didn't lift it for the toast. Her gaze was unwavering, fixed on me like she was waiting for something. I didn't know what to make of it. The boss finished his speech, and everyone cheered, clinking their glasses. I raised mine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Then, just as I took a sip, the lights flickered. It was just for a moment, and then they came back on. But in that brief instant, I saw it. The woman, she wasn't standing in the same spot anymore. She was closer, standing right beside me. I felt my heart race as I instinctively took a step back. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that sent a chill down my spine. It was empty, like she wasn't even present in the room with us. Before I could say anything, she leaned in slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You shouldn't have taken that drink," she said, and just as quickly as she appeared, she was gone. No footsteps, no sound, just nothing. I looked around, hoping someone had witnessed what I'd just seen. But no one seemed to have noticed anything unusual. The music was still playing, people were still chatting, and the night seemed to continue as if nothing had happened. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. I hurried to the restroom to splash some water on my face. Maybe I was just imagining things. When I returned to the party, I scanned the crowd, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. But she was gone. I asked a few coworkers if they had seen her, but everyone looked at me like I was crazy. No one knew who I was talking about. Later that evening, after the party had ended and most people had left, I stayed behind to finish some work. The office was eerily quiet. As I passed by the conference room, I glanced inside. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see something that made my blood run cold. There, in the corner of the room, was the same woman from the party. She was standing in front of the office's large windows, staring out into the dark. I tried to brush it off, but I couldn't help myself. I approached the door slowly and called out, asking if she was okay. There was no response. I stepped inside, but as soon as I did, the temperature in the room dropped. It felt like I had stepped into an icebox. Then, just as suddenly, the lights flickered again. When they came back on, she was gone. To this day, I don't know who she was or what her intentions were. But every year, when the office holiday party rolls around, I can't shake the feeling that something strange happened that night, something I wasn't meant to witness. I'll never forget the look in her eyes, the quiet warning she gave me just before disappearing. Something about that moment sticks with me, and I've never been able to explain it. All I know is that every year, when December rolls around, I'm just a little more cautious about who I talk to at the office party. There was something